evening. Apologies for the slightly late start. We've had a few technical issues today, but we're here and we're so excited for this special meeting of the Pharmacy Female Leaders Network in conjunction with the RPS. So we're really excited to be talking about intersectionality today as part of the RPS's celebrations around the South Asian Heritage Month. And there's been so many amazing events already. So I'm hoping that you've been able to follow some of those. And today we get to talk about intersectionality, which was something actually that I didn't even know what it was until last year when I was talking to Aman from the RPS about this. And so I'm hoping that you'll get I know a lot of people don't know what it is. They don't know how it impacts them. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'll just introduce Rena, who's obviously my co-host from the Leaders Network. We are sadly missing Kamal this evening, who is having to juggle the demands of motherhood with having to work in the evenings, which will be one of the things we talk about today as we're covering intersectionality. So Aman is very willingly or unwillingly, as the case may be, Aman stepped in. As I've just said, Aman, you can talk about this. So we'll be leading the discussion today, but absolutely wanting to hear Aman's views on this as well. And hopefully Kamal might be able to join us a little bit later, fingers crossed, if she can. Okay, so listen, intersectionality, if you go and look this up, if you Google it, this is the actual definition, right? It's the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Right? Now, I don't know about you. When I read that and I just went, what does that mean? Because it's a very technical term, and I thought, I'm not quite sure what that means. So, to try and put it in layman's terms and to try and put it in pharmacy speak, as it were, it's about what does it mean to you being a pharmacist or technician or working in pharmacy, being a female. Some of us are mothers. Rena, Kamal and I are all business owners. We're also of South Asian heritage. How does that all overlap and how does that actually impact us? And actually understanding this intersectionality is essential to combating the interwoven prejudices that people face in their daily lives. So we all have faced, we will all have faced prejudice at some point. Some of it will be based on race. Some of it will be based on gender. Some of it can be based on sexuality. Some of it can be based on the job that we do. The culture that we're in. There's lots and lots of different things, and there's some really great graphics out there that show you some of this. And show you the scale. So if we take race, for instance, we've got white on one side, we've got black on the other side, but in between you've got all the varying different, combinations that you can have, and it's the same with, even gender now. You've got, male and female, but you've got lots of different variations in between. And everybody, nobody fits a mold. Everyone has some or lots of these. It all overlaps. It all combines. And it's about understanding how our social identities play into our privilege and as well as the prejudice that we face. So it's really quite interesting thinking about this. And so the first question I wanted to ask my lovely co-panel speakers today is, when I'm talking about intersectionality, now we've given a little bit of a definition on what that means. What does it mean to you? And I'll come to you first, Rena. What does intersectionality mean to you?
Well, I think I'm like you, Harpreet. I, had to Google the word as well and think, gosh, this is really harsh, isn't it? The kind of thought of all of these things is a really harsh kind of thing to think about and a thing to reflect on. And I guess when I reflected on it, I think it's all the things that have always made me not so confident and made me feel different. And it's all those little things that have made me very acutely aware of all the injustices in the world and kind of, the fact I'm Asian, the fact I'm small, the fact I'm a woman, are all the things that bug me because I don't want to be treated differently because I'm those few things, if that makes sense. And it's the sort of thing that drives me to kind of do more to, kind of end that discrimination and end those. I don't want to feel disadvantaged by it, if that makes sense. I kind of want to turn it on its head. I don't want to feel ashamed of my heritage. I don't want to feel ashamed that I'm a pharmacist. I don't want to feel ashamed that I'm a woman. I actually want to flip it on its head and think, actually, these things are maybe superpowers. they're quite unique characteristics that I have that actually I can play to my strengths. And I think increasingly in the world we live in too, people want Asian women to join boards. People want that diversity. So while, for years I kind of pretended I wasn't Asian and pretended I wasn't a woman and thought I can do anything a man can do. Actually, I'm really proud that I'm a woman and doing what women can do. I'm really proud that I'm Asian and doing what Asian people can do. I can cook, clean, talk to my family and, do all the sort of things that Asian people do, but still do my day job and do everything else. So for me, it's been a real kind of soul-searching kind of thought process about these different intersectionalities. But it also makes me look at others in different ways now too, because I look at what are their social categorizations and how are they being treated because of those, including just in my own family. We've had a first, gay relationship in our Asian family, which has been really interesting to see how people have adapted to that. We've had in my own pharmacy, for example, we've got, people who are going through gender transition and, my team having to adapt to things like that in the pharmacy. And, it's really interesting. The intersectionality of all of these things is kind of slowly creeping into our lives. And I think that's for the better. I've always kind of lived by the motto, if you can do anything or be anything, be kind. And actually, this is the kind of base intersectionality, isn't it? Because regardless of people's different social categorizations, if you can be kind, that kind of just helps with all the different discriminations and disadvantages, doesn't it? But that's my kind of initial thoughts. I don't know how Aman feels about it.
So similar, really, Rena, about the differences and the barriers that you experience at different intersections. So just thinking about my own personal intersectionality, because I'm also a carer, a South Asian woman, and obviously, so just thinking about how those different things combine, but recognizing actually, like you said, that there's a positive to it. There's a wholeness that I bring to a team, and diversity of thought and experience that I contribute that no one else can, because of my unique experience of being at those intersections that no one else has. And so that's how I like to see it. And then talking from a wider perspective from the profession, I hear it all the time. We're never just one thing. And, even when it comes to our white male colleagues, I think they forget that they are also intersectional beings that this applies to. And I think sometimes we forget that. They forget that, and we forget that in conversations like these. So I think it's really important to highlight that. The other thing, I suppose, for me is the challenge of living in that intersection. So I know from my personal experience, being a South Asian woman can be complicated. Living in a Western world, I'm sure that's a song, and having an Eastern, it's having an Eastern bringing, having been brought up in an Eastern way, living in a Western culture is so hard at times to bring that together. So it's actually thinking about how that intersect meets and how you can make it suit you in a way that you belong in both. And I find that actually that's probably more of a challenge sometimes than the barriers that you may experience in your workplace, and the differences that you've got.
You've both raised some amazing points there. I was just taking some notes so I don't forget, because my brain's not what it used to be. I forget things. So the first thing I wanted to just pick up on is, I think you're absolutely right, Rena, by being aware of our own intersectionality, it then allows us to become allies to various other people, that have also got some of these intersections. By recognizing our own, I think we become much, much more attuned to other people's intersectionalities and how that might be playing out for them, what prejudices they might be feeling. And I think if we can really focus on ours, it allows us to be allies for those people. So that in itself is great. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing was around the being kind. And it brings me back to something my son said. And he was just like, we were talking about, we have a same-sex couple that lives next door to us. And I made a comment of like, oh, you only have one mum. And he goes, well, no, that's not true, mummy. I was trying to get him to behave. So I was like, no, you only have one mum. You have to be kind to mum. And he was like, no, that's not true, mummy, because, the boy next door, he's got two mummies, and some people have two mummies. And then he said, but that's okay, isn't it, mummy? Because as long as they love each other, that's okay. And it was just that tolerance in that moment in my 8-year-old boy. I was so proud of him. And I said, because we've always taught him like that. And I said, and just like you said, Rena, it doesn't matter actually who you are, where you're from, what you follow, whatever you class yourself as, actually just being kind to each other and, and being loving actually costs us nothing. And we're all human. We're all part of the same race at the end of the day. We're all human. That is one thing we've all got in common. And so just something about that when you said that really rang true for me. And I said, actually, it's important to be aware of these differences, if you want to call them differences. But actually, underneath, we're all really the same. We're all here to learn, to grow, to love, right? And then that brings me really nicely to the next point, which was you both said, it's all about where we don't feel like we belong or where we feel different. And this is it. And I thought, why is that? And why is it that, so obviously, we are from South Asian heritage and we live in a country where we're not the majority. So for us, we do feel different. And there's been many, many rooms where I've walked in as the only person of colour and felt very, very different and isolated and felt like, oh, are people judging me, or I feel a bit uncomfortable. And we feel that a lot as women as well, even though our sector is 60% women, particularly when we've been working in leadership positions, as we all have. We know that the majority of top leadership positions in pharmacy are held by men. And so it's not uncommon for me to have gone into a room of all men. Rena, obviously you serve on a board that's all a committee, that's all men. So we've almost become used to it, is what I'm saying. As women, we become used to it. We're from South Asian heritage. We become used to it. Sometimes I can be the only mother in the room, and I've got used to that. It's really interesting when the tables are turned. And I was at it was like a networking event, and it was a women's networking event. And we had this amazing male speaker come and talk about his sort of experiences. And the first thing he said, I was actually really nervous because I'm in a room full of women and I'm the only man. And for the first time in my life, I got a sense of how you women must feel when it's the other way around. And that really, I really sat and thought about that. And I thought, yeah, he's probably never experienced that before. And he was very honest. He said, I've never been in this situation where I'm the only man. And actually, it's quite intimidating being the only man in a room. And I felt like saying, I do this at work every day. This is something that we have to deal with. And so there was something I just wanted to pick up about this sense of belonging and this sense of feeling different and how that plays into our thoughts about our own intersectionality. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think, because we're Asian, and I guess we came to this country where we're not a majority, we were kind of brought up to fit in, weren't we, and not stand out. It's kind of like the upbringing that we had. I was the only Asian child in my junior school, and I did everything I could to not tell anybody I was Asian, even though I had brown skin. My own children, went to school, and I think it was only about when they were 7 or 8 they realized they were Indian. I don't think they understood the concept of the fact that they were different, which I love in a way, but also it's really interesting, isn't it? And my children sort of say to me, oh, we don't like Indian food, we're English. Like, well, no, you're not. You're actually Indian. It doesn't matter that you don't like Indian food, but you are Indian, and it's a really kind of interesting kind of thought process that we've kind of gone through from a young age, haven't we, by being in this country and feeling different. And maybe early on in those days, we were made to feel different. And I don't feel now that we're made to feel different. And I think people do look at us, and maybe there'll be some people who have some biases still and some discriminatory views. But I increasingly, as I get older and as the years go by and we're having more conversations like that, feel like I do belong. But also probably the bigger part of that is that I feel I deserve to belong, which is probably that shift that has happened in myself and in that kind of growth that we go through and in fighting the inequities and the injustice of all of it. Why shouldn't I be there? And why shouldn't I question, things? And I remember some of the first early meetings I went to when I first qualified as a pharmacist. And I remember this white older lady coming up to me. She said, oh, you've got a very good English accent, haven't you? And I was like taken aback thinking, oh my gosh, why would she think I wouldn't, And she said, do you come from Surrey? You've got a very good Surrey accent. I said, oh, funnily enough, I do come from Surrey, but, it was really interesting. And another patient, when I first took over my pharmacy, it was really hot, but like it is today. And I remember him coming into the pharmacy, he said, "Oh, do you feel the heat like we do?" And I thought, yeah, I may have brown skin, but I was born in Croydon, mate, and it was as hot there as it is in Sutton, you know, it's no different. And it was just really funny. And I've spent a lot of my time challenging those mindsets. And I think particularly within our South Asian culture, we hold a lot of biases, and we hold a lot of discriminatory views just within our own culture, different caste system, different languages, different religions, different beliefs. And I found increasingly one of my kind of, you know, the way I tackle these things is to challenge those mindsets. It's having those uncomfortable conversations with my mum, with my mother-in-law, with my aunts and uncles. And, you know, the more you do that, the more the society changes and the world thinks differently. I went to visit my aunt and uncle who'd been on a cruise, and they were so happy about this cruise. They were telling me all about it. And they said, oh, the only one bad thing was that there were loads of gay people on the cruise. And I was like, oh my gosh, you can't say that. You know, I said, you can't say that anymore. What don't you know that you can't say things like that? And you can't think that either. And I really challenged them to think what it must be like for somebody who's gay to be on a cruise, and how difficult that must be to be able to, you know, go out and openly, you know, be gay in a cruise ship and be accepted. And, you know, I actually had that really kind of deep and meaningful conversation with my elderly aunt and uncle to kind of challenge their mindset. And they all came around after I did that conversation. And I think for too long, we've been scared to have those conversations, haven't we? We've been scared to challenge them. Or when we were younger, if we did, we were just considered the rebellious one. Oh, you know, you shouldn't say that, and you should, you know, have our beliefs, and you should do these things. And I think more and more, I love having those conversations, especially as a mum as well with my children. My children have just got so few biases and so few prejudices. And, you know, they all say to me, oh, Mum, you're so stereotypical. Why do you say those things? Why do you do those things? And I love the fact they challenge me. And that's the kind of growth that I want from my own family as well. I don't know how Aman feels about it, but that's how I feel about it.
No, it's really interesting listening to your experience, Rena, because I was just thinking about mine, and I grew up in Leicester. So for me, I was the majority growing up. So it was completely different for me. I didn't feel different because everyone looked like me at school and at home, you know, so everywhere I went, even at university, I stayed at Leicester. So I never really felt like the minority group. It was only when I moved to Salisbury, knew I was different, but then even then everyone was really nice, because it was more of a intrigue of, oh, we've got someone different, you know, the first South Asian person in our whole department, let's learn. It was done in a really nice way, but it was really when I kind of entered into national pharmacy roles, that's when I really started noticing the difference. Before then, maybe it was naivety, but it didn't even occur to me that I was different. But then also reflecting, you know, you do assimilate, like as I'm sat here with blonde short hair, you know, that did not go down very well with my parents. You know, they were like, why are you trying to be white? I'm like, I'm not trying to be white, it's just what I like. But you know, you do end up assimilating in some ways that you don't even realize you're doing, until you stop and you reflect and you think, oh yeah, like I've probably been more accepted in some circles because of the way I look. I don't look Indian in some ways. And actually, oddly, I used to find that a compliment, but now I'm like, why did I ever think that was a good thing? Because it is a journey, isn't it, to have self-acceptance throughout. But like you, I said, you know, having those conversations with my parents now, it's really interesting because they do say certain things. Like my mum, you know, is more than supportive of my friends that are, you know, gay. But if I was to become, if I was said I was gay, then, oh, that would be a whole different story, you know. So it's having those conversations and actually introducing them to a world where it doesn't really matter, you know, and we need to move forward. But it can be quite challenging to have those conversations. And like you said, you're the rebellious one. You know, funnily enough, at the weekend, I got told to be quiet because I'm a girl, and you're like, you can't be an educated person with a view in one place and then not have that in another way. So it's a challenge, but it's a really interesting one. And I think the fact that we're even having this conversation just goes to show how much we've progressed in this area, because 3 years ago, you know, we wouldn't have even been having this discussion or have the platform to have this discussion, or people listening or wanting to hear our experiences.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think just to add to that, I think sometimes I personally feel my greatest critics are our own people of South Asian heritage, sometimes women, who can just be quite horrible to other Asian women. I've had that in workplaces happen to me, and I find that really kind of shocking sometimes. But actually, Asian men really struggling with an Asian woman who wants to, be on a board, for example, or have an opinion. And, and it's interesting how maybe I let those people criticize me more, and I shouldn't probably, but for some reason their criticism really grates at me a lot. And again, maybe I shouldn't allow that to happen. But again, maybe we should be challenging those criticisms, shouldn't we? And every time they make a comment that kind of grates at us, maybe we should have the strength and courage to say, actually, what you said kind of, hurt me. And can we think about this from a different way? Can we think about how that maybe affected me? Or, I kind of spend my time with a lot of older Asian males. They tend to be community pharmacy contractors. And, many of them have daughters. And I think, I wonder if you talk to your daughter that way, or if somebody talked to your daughter like that at their work and they came home and told you, you'd be flabbergasted, yet you speak to me in a certain way and treat me differently. And I think it's a hard conversation to have. And I almost want to have it quite openly with some Asian men to make them just realize how I feel. And so, while we're celebrating South Asian Heritage Month, we should also think about the things that really still need to change within our culture to really, accept that intersectionality, to really, turn all those disadvantaged categorizations and discriminatory social categorizations into a positive where we all just, one big happy family, because wouldn't that just be great?
It would be. And thank you again for raising some really interesting points. And I agree with you, Rena, having also worked at a senior national level with lots of older Asian men and having many of them. And I know that they came from a good place, but instead of respecting my authority as a subject matter expert, treating me like a daughter, saying to me that I can't possibly do my job and be a mother at the same time. And that was really hard for me to hear when I came back, because I felt incredibly judged that I came back to a full-time position. And I was judged for that. It was, well, how can you possibly be a good mother and still, try and do this job? Something's going to have to give. And, for me, then struggling with my mental health in the same role, I really felt like I couldn't say anything, because I thought, well, I'm going to be proving everybody right. I really did take their views on board. And I think sometimes we don't understand the impact of our words. And so I just wanted to pick up on that. And actually, we should be calling out now, knowing what I know what I would have said, that many years ago. But I didn't have the courage at the time. Now I question it. I question it even in my own family. When the Lionesses won the Euros, within minutes, some, sexist meme came out on our family group, and I called it out and I said, I'm sorry. And we forgot you're sensitive about this. No, I'm not sensitive about it. Right. I call it out when it needs to be called out. And actually, that's not appropriate. And you've got daughters. And again, Rena, you wouldn't want your daughters to be treated like that. They are experts in their own way, and you would expect them to get the respect in a workplace, which effectively is what their football pitch is. These women are at work. They get paid to do this. This is their job. Please don't undermine them just because they're women, and I was like, and it's the same thing as, just think about your daughters and how you would want them to be treated at work. And having experienced this at my level that I did and seen what it did to my mental health, I went, don't ever underestimate the impact of your words and the things that you send around in jest to other people, because it can really affect them. So I just wanted to highlight that there. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on is just moving on to, what you were saying around what our own culture does to our own culture. And we were talking about feeling different. And it was something I think Aman said we were made to feel different. I was being made to, you were made, I wasn't made to feel different. And I started to think, why was I made to feel different? Yes, there's an element of, if you're not in the majority, you feel different. But actually, it was my own parents who did this, who said, remember where you're from. You're not like these people, Harpreet. You're not English. You're not white. You're Indian. And, we still speak Punjabi. I don't speak English at home. I'm not allowed to, right? It was like, this is a Punjabi household. You speak Punjabi. You can speak English out there. But in this household, you speak Punjabi. And it still is that way, right? And they're very, very particular about their ways, their culture. And I understand that, because they don't want to dilute it. I do get that to a certain point. But for me, certainly growing up, I was always reminded that I was different and that I wasn't the same. And, you know, I can even go as far to say, my mum and dad said to me, you need to learn how to read and write Punjabi. I really did not want to give up my Saturday mornings. And I was like, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to give up my Saturday morning lying? And my mum and dad said, well, you know what? You never know when we might get thrown out of this country. And if we do, you're going to need to know your mother tongue if we have to go back to India. That is literally what was instilled in me for the first 16, 17 years of my life, was this threat of, this isn't our country. We might not even be welcome in. I did experience racism. I grew up in Enoch Powell's constituency of Wolverhampton. So there was still legacy racism there, even though there's a big Indian community in Wolverhampton. I still experienced it, particularly where I lived, because there weren't many Indians there. And so, yeah, I was constantly aware of this, and I was constantly, made aware, as I said, by my parents, that this isn't our country. We're almost here on borrowed time. We might have to leave, and then what would you do? And that's a really difficult place to grow up in. And I think thinking about our children, Rena, and you said they're much more tolerant. Same with my son. He didn't know he was Indian. I had to explain that to him. He just was like, we're all the same. He didn't see color as a difference, and I love that, because that's exactly how it should be. And I think as our children grow as well, we'll see more and more of that. And it's because I've not made him feel different. And I think that's the key, is that sometimes our own culture can make us feel different. And it's that fine balance between, we want to retain our culture and our heritage, but at the same time, it's what I always say, I don't forget who I am, but I don't forget where I am either. And it's about being able to balance those two. And so just bringing into something like this is the other thing that I was thinking about are cultural expectations. Being of South Asian heritage, many, many times my friends who are not South Asian will say to me, Harpreet, why can't you just tell your family this? Why can't you just tell your mother-in-law that? Why are you having to do all of this stuff? And I have to try and explain it's a cultural expectation. I am expected as an Indian woman, as an Indian daughter-in-law, to always put my in-laws first. To always do, always make sure they're fed and they're looked after before I even sit down myself. And it's very difficult to say no. And, I do a lot of work with females in pharmacy on how to push back and say no. And I get a lot of the Asians saying to me, Harpreet, this is really hard, because, in our culture, we can't push back and say no. And so I just wanted to explore what your experiences were around cultural expectations. And knowing both of you as personally as I do, I'm sure there's going to be some good examples there.
I can go, and I think those cultural expectations are ones that we put on ourselves too. And again, this is where I challenge the mindset. My mother-in-law recently said to me, "Oh, you've put on weight, Rena." I think that, okay, yeah, I'm going to take that. I'm not going to sort of get upset about it. Yeah, go on then. I have put on weight. And she says, "You don't need to work so hard, Rena." I was like, well, actually, I do. I am going to work hard, and I enjoy working hard. That's what I need to do. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a good mum, doesn't mean that I don't feed my children, but I had to explain that to her, because I think she thinks because I work hard, I don't feed my children and I neglect my family and I don't do the things I should be doing as a cultural expectation of a daughter-in-law or a mother. And again, it's challenging those conversations, isn't it? Those comments. There's a little rhetoric that kind of goes with those cultural expectations, and it's just constantly turning around and saying, no, that's maybe how things were. It's not how things are now. And I don't think that's wrong. And, I am with you with that children thing about that dilution. And it's that fine balance, like, of not diluting our culture and heritage, but also changing where change needs to happen. And change really needs to happen in these cultural expectations, because we live in a different world. We live in an England world, an English world. In this world, we live in a Western world. We are working women. We are educated. And there's so many differences to the cultural expectations of years gone by, because women were in a different place then to where they are now. So actually, shouldn't we be creating our own cultural expectations, or kind of helping women to release themselves from those cultural expectations? Because actually, how liberating is that? And how liberating is it to say, actually, no, I can be an Asian woman, I can be a mother, I can be a daughter-in-law, I can be a business owner, I can be a pharmacist, I can work, I can still go to the Asian wedding, put on my Asian clothes and, take part in all the religious ceremonies. But, I can still be all of it as well. I don't have to conform to this kind of set standard operating procedure of how an Asian woman should be. And I kind of feel really, again, kind of fired up by the kind of injustices of cultural expectations, and again, very fired up to challenge them, because we create our new norms, and we create those by being role models for other women, and being role models for people in our family as well. Because if I do it, then the daughter-in-laws that come after me will then do it too, and it'll just be an accepted norm. And so I kind of feel really strongly about that. I will teach my boys, I've got sons, and I teach them to cook. My mother-in-law was in shock. She goes, "Oh no, you can't get them to sweep the floor. You can't get them to cook." I was like, "Why not?" They're growing up to be modern men in a very different world. There is absolutely nothing wrong with those things. And again, it's just that challenge, that constant challenge. But it's like you're on it all the time, trying to just change mindsets.
Yeah, no, I agree, Rena. I literally was going to write a list of all the things that are expected of me, and then I don't meet them. But like fitting to an SOP is not what happens to me naturally, so I naturally rebel with that. So again, like you mentioned, how the way you look. So I power lift, and immediately my parents were like, no, you can't do that. That's not very ladylike, and your body is changing in a way that is not very ladylike. And you're like, well, you don't look Indian. I don't even know what that means. But there's all these expectations that are put out there, and you're just meant to know what's right or wrong, and that's really difficult. And the impact on your well-being, juggling that, because even though you are strong and you go, right, I'm above this, I'm going to do what I want, there's also a little nagging there going, oh no, I'm disappointing someone, and that has a massive impact on your mental well-being, doesn't it? Because you can be strong, but at some point you're like, it's quite wearing. And I'm not going to lie, like I have had moments where I've gone, why can't I just be normal in an Indian sense? And I don't even know what that is, but you think, oh, is there a way of living a life where you're not constantly being badgered about you're not doing this right or you're not doing that right? And because there is a lot of pressure. Like personally, I was married and now I'm divorced, but again, like you were saying, both of you saying about the expectations of being a daughter-in-law and working, and doing everything else on top of that, it's not possible. And we need to move away from those old traditions that served a purpose absolutely at the time, but we're in a different place now. And if both people need to work, then both people need to share the load. But it's having those conversations which are challenging, because again, you're being difficult, and it always goes back down. It's like a vicious circle, isn't it? It goes back there again. But without challenging it, you can't ever move forward. So but it's really, really interesting, because I think we're all probably very like-minded. We're on this call talking about this, but having these conversations, hopefully we're inspiring other people, other women who are in a similar position, to go, actually, I'm going to say something today because it's not okay. And be empowered to have that conversation.
It's not easy though, and as I said, as I've been the one that's challenged even my own family, and this is my generation, it's not even my parents' generation, and I've been tarred with the brush of, oh, she's a feminist, oh, she's sensitive. Like, I am a feminist and I'm proud of it. My husband is also a feminist and I'm proud that he is. But I was like, no, I'm not sensitive about it. Actually, why is it that just because I'm South Asian, I'm a woman, and I'm a mother, I'm expected to be the one that looks after my, we all get together. I'm the one expected to be in the kitchen and look after my son and put him to sleep whilst my husband gets to drink with the other men next door. What's that about? Don't I work as long hours as he does? And don't I deserve a Saturday night off? Why do I have to spend my Saturday night serving the men? And this is exactly what happens. And sometimes I'm serving them till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, because they want to sit there and have a good time. And I'm sitting there thinking, do you know, my evening's gone and I'm tired and I want to go home now, but I can't, because the men still need serving. And I know that this happens a lot in our culture. And so to question that is actually really quite tough. And you get, as I said, tarred with this brush of, oh, she's just prickly, or, she's trying to cause trouble. Not causing trouble, but just like you said, Rena, why shouldn't the boys be taught how to do work? My grandma did the same. I have one little brother, 4 girls, 1 little brother, and we used to make him do housework, and she'd say, oh, the girls have got the boy doing work. Oh, this is awful. And I'd say to her, no, his wife will thank me one day that he's not completely useless and can do things for himself. And she does, by the way. Thank us all, because he's great. He's learned so much. But had my grandmother had her way, he'd have been mollycoddled and wouldn't have known how to do anything. And so, you know, what I'm just saying is that it is very difficult to challenge some of these, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And I think if there's one thing I've learned in my career, I should have called things out a lot earlier than I did. And I don't mind being known as the prickly one. I'm like, I say it how it is. And if you don't like that, then that's fine. You don't have to like it. But in my house, at least, it's 50-50. It's equal all the way.
And I can think of a recent time we had some family over for a kind of big family gathering. And normally it was always the men who eat first, the older men or the children, and the women always eat last, don't we? Because they're always left, like you said, serving the food, warming it, and then we eat the cold leftovers that are left over in the bowl. And I decided to just break that tradition. I just said, no, we're all going to eat together. You're just going to help yourself and go sit where you want to sit. There's no who eats first. And my older aunt came over to me saying, no, Rena, we can't do that. I said, yes, we can. We can change things. Everybody can eat at the same time. Her daughters came over to me and said, thank you for saying that to my mum, because if we'd said it, that, you know, my mum would have just, my aunt would have said to them, oh, you're being rebellious, you can't do that, you know, what will everyone think? But because you've gone and set that trend, Rena, now we can all do that. We don't need to have the airs and graces. We don't need to do that anymore. And I said, that's exactly what we should all be doing. You know, when our parents say things or do things, if there's no like real reason why this has to happen, we don't do it, because it can change, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing's set in stone, written everywhere that a man must eat first. But why have we followed these years of cultural expectations and traditions? And why have we always come second best? I'm sorry, I'm hungry, especially when you cook the food, you're starving. And you know, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I just think it is that constant. It is really hard to challenge, but we shouldn't not do it. And there's a respectful way of doing it, isn't there? And then actually, you know, my children just get argumentative, saying, why do we need to do it that way? Why? And they just keep asking that 5 whys. And by the time they've asked my mum or my mother-in-law that 5 whys, they just give up and say, okay, go on, do it. Because they can't actually tell you why we do some of the things we do. There's no reason, is there?
They say it's society says so. That's what my dad says. It's just what we do in our society. I'm like, well, society's not always right, Dad. You know, we should question this. And we've had a couple of really interesting comments in the chat, actually, about this very same thing. So Gaurav says that the irony being that Indians in India are more modern in their thinking, and the diaspora that from the 1970s that came here, that's my family as well, are still stuck with those outdated cultural norms around the role of women. What do you think about that? I
couldn't agree with that more. I look at my family in India and like my nieces and nephews and what they're up to on Instagram, and I'm just in awe of the way they live their lives, and just think, gosh, that they're so different. And I love it. I love the fact that, you know, India has changed so much because it needed to as well. But, you know, why haven't we? Because we've tried to stay in our ways, follow traditions that we felt would keep our connection to our culture and heritage, but we've kept those wrong traditions and the wrong bits of our heritage. And that's what we're talking about, challenging those wrong bits, but keeping the good bits, keeping the celebration of Diwali, the family togetherness. There's so many beautiful things that I love about being South Asian. Our foodiness, our delicious food that we eat, our sense of belonging, the fact you belong to a greater, larger family gives you such an amazing sense of well-being and belonging in society. And you know, whenever you meet up with your cousins, it's like even if you don't see them for a month, it's like you know belong with each other, and it's a lovely feeling, isn't it, of that kind of Asian culture and some of the traditions and some of the wedding ceremonies. It's all just stunning and beautiful. So we hold on to the right things, but come on, let's just act some of those awful things that really need to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it does depend on where in India, because like my cousins, with my dad from a very small village, and it's interesting to see how my cousins are treated, and it's still very traditional, which is frustrating for me. You know, my cousin got sent to, she was introduced to this guy through family, she talked to him, he's in New Zealand, and they spoke on WhatsApp, and then they got married, you know, and they're like a very modern day arranged marriage. And I said to my dad, you would never put that expectation on me. And he just said, that's just how things are out there, you know. And you're like, well, we have to move forward, because you're sending this poor girl who's never been out of India, let alone out of her city lines, to New Zealand as a wife, which is huge. You know, she's really lucky that her experience has been really positive. But there might have been a really negative experience, which I'm sure we've all had experience of in our own culture. But it's just interesting how different parts of India, it just shows how vast it is. There's still pockets of some very traditional practice, but then at the same time, her brother is sharing on Instagram women of powerlifting and in dancing around in very Western clothes, and you're like, if that was your sister, you'd have a real issue with it. Well, I know, because I put her in my English clothes and you really didn't like it. So there's so much positivity, but it's just the element of hypocrisy that we probably need to tease out and address as well.
For sure. And it's interesting. Bizola came in with a comment very similar to what you said, Rena, in terms of, I really think it's important not to lose culture. Not everything needs to change, as the word uniqueness is also important. I quite agree. Understanding cultures is very important, but listening to one another is also very important. And I think, there are people in our generation that still want to observe some of those cultures. And I do respect that as well. I will always gauge where I'm at before I raise things. But certainly with my family, who I know are very, similar in thinking to me, I feel quite comfortable challenging that. And I think that this is, obviously gauge the audience, but you should, where you think things are wrong or they're not quite aligned with who you are or your values, we should feel that we can challenge those. We shouldn't feel that we have to keep quiet. Shut up and be quiet. You're just a girl. Had that many a time, like you said, Evan. And it's things like that need to change. Because certainly sometimes I have felt as an Indian woman, like a second-class citizen, and I have said that too. And I said it's all about the men, and I feel that the women are just an afterthought, and that is changing. And we really do need to work on that some more. I think all of us, to try and challenge some of those beliefs.
But there's also things like women's health issues, being pharmacists. It's really interesting. So, when we did that, we did a really good Female Leaders Network session on menopause. There was a great slide of all the different symptoms of menopause. And I thought, I'm going to put that on my family WhatsApp group, including the male cousins and husbands and people. And all the women were just said thank you straight away. And actually was good to share it with the men too, because they will read some of those symptoms of menopause and signs and think, gosh, that's what my wife's going through right now. And I hadn't realized that that's menopause, and it's about breaking those taboos as well. So it's not just about cultural expectations and things like that. We've got a lot of cultural taboos. We don't talk about women's health problems. We don't talk about periods, because there's period shame in our culture, and often in a lot of our cultures we don't talk about menopause and any of those sort of problems. Or if a woman's gone for a hysterectomy, you don't say it was ladies' problems. Nobody talks about these things in our culture. And I think there's obviously challenging those cultural expectations, but also the taboos around health, especially for women, especially as pharmacists. And it's about understanding the intersectionality in terms of our health conversations as well as pharmacists, and understanding. So I'm a vaccinator, run a COVID vaccination site. I get a lot of Muslim women coming in saying, can you please make sure the doors are locked, make sure nobody sees me when I take my clothes off for you to inject my arm. And it's respecting those cultures, respecting those beliefs, and really supporting people to feel comfortable to have conversations about health. You get Muslim women coming in to talk about morning after pill, and you're having to have these really sensitive conversations with people. And I think, again, as much as we want to break those cultural expectations, it's also that the taboos, I think, are really, really important.
That was an eye-opener for me, when you think about the fact that there was no word for hysterectomy, and there's no word for menopause in most South Asian languages, which just goes to show you, when there's not even a term to describe it, this really isn't discussed. And so I'm really glad that you called that out as well, Rena, because it's really important that we are having these conversations with our elders as well. It's important that we raise these. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to end on this last question. We've talked a lot about our own intersectionality, and just to leave on a bit of a positive note, what do we think talking about our intersectionality actually helps to achieve, and what do we want to see happen?
Go on, Aman. Yeah.
It creates that sense of belonging that we've been talking about, doesn't it? Because people can relate. It makes you feel like you can resonate with people's experiences, and it being reflected back at you, which makes you feel like there is place for you in this profession or community, because you've got very similar lived experiences. So I think it absolutely does enable that, and it also encourages other people to share where they might not have been comfortable to share. Because in the whole time that I've been a pharmacist, I've never really this is the most I've probably ever spoken about it in a public way, and it's been really lovely. And also things like the Commonwealth game. I don't know if anyone watched the closing ceremony and saw the bit about the daytimers scene in Birmingham, and then Punjabi MC was on there, and just, you know, like watching your experience being resonated back at you in such a public way. It's so lovely, because you do feel like there is a place for you here, and that's being appreciated. So I think it is really important that, you know, these conversations are happening so that people feel like they can. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be people of South Asian communities, but other communities are encouraged then also to go, yes, you know, we have a similar thing, or this is our experience, because then it encourages that openness, and also that diversity of experience and culture. Because, you know, I think we've probably never really considered cultural competence in patient care the way we have done now. Like, it's just hopefully being threaded through, that it's just second nature, that you don't have to then think, oh, you know, it's an additional thing. So it's really, really positive.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, totally agree.
Rina, yeah, come.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, you know, why it's so important is that sense of belonging, isn't it? So that you feel like you're not the only one. It's so easy, isn't it? In this world full of social media and connections, it's so easy to feel alone, isn't it? And so easy to feel like nobody thinks like you, nobody has the same pressures as you. You know, Aman looks like she's a really together Asian woman who doesn't understand what it's like to have a nagging mum, but here you are, you've just, you know, just explained that you're the rebel of your family. No one will look at Harpreet and think she has the struggles in her family with her, you know, the prejudices and all the different things. But actually, the more we talk about it, the more we realize we're all carrying the same baggage, aren't we? And we're all dealing with it. And actually, some of us are challenging it at faster rates than others. But actually, it's that, like I said, it's that kind of growth that we all need to kind of go through to realize actually it's normal. It's how we all been brought up. We've all had these very different upbringings, but it's a lot to do with our South Asian heritage, which is, like I said, always something to be proud of. But actually, you know, we should be challenging some of these things. And again, I just think that, you know, the thing I mentioned about earlier about that, sometimes our own people are our greatest critic, I think is something that will hopefully ring true with a lot of people, because I'm sure they feel that too. And we've got to challenge that too, don't we? If we can't get our own people to understand us, what hope have we got of getting others? So again, this conversation is for our own people. Hopefully lots of people listening to this thinking, gosh, you know, I've said that before, I've thought that before, I've got that prejudice, I've got that bias. I need to change my mindset, and I need to change the mindsets of people around me. So for me, that's kind of the kind of positive end of this conversation.
I just wanted to add one additional point, just thinking about bringing it back to the profession, about having these conversations really enables the allyship piece. There is a lack of representation across senior leadership roles. We know that, but actually, you know, these things all have a play into why, because, you know, we might not be struggling for those roles because of the imposter syndrome, the cultural expectations put on South Asian women, or, you know, women from different communities. So I think having these conversations, it allows for an understanding from an allyship perspective. So when jobs are being promoted, or thinking about the language and actually what would fit in a more flexible working way, and having that representation. So I think there's a real benefit in having these conversations as well, to make sure that these points are considered, because sometimes policies and stuff are set without having that diversity of thought in the room. And if that diversity is not included, then maybe things like this can be accessed as a resource to gain that understanding, where you might not have someone to speak to as a colleague. So I think there is an added benefit here as well.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. You know, and I think we've, you know, I've had such I could easily talk about this for another half an hour, but I'm conscious of the time. So I think I'm going to call it a night there, and having a bit of a coughing fit as well. So I probably won't talk too much more. But thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening, for your wonderful comments. And I really hope that you found the event enjoyable and useful. And I'll hand over to Aman to wrap up.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Harpreet and Rina, for this conversation. And thank you for taking over the RPS channels this evening. Just a question in the chat box about other sessions that are happening. So for South Asian Heritage Month, we'll have one more event in September, which It's most likely going to be an online event celebrating our the heritage within the profession. So we'll be sending out further details hopefully in the next couple of weeks about that. So do look out for them. But in terms of other live sessions, we tend to share them through our events page and events webinar, email, and on social media, and depending on who we're talking to, through their email channels as well. But I just want to say a final thank you for this really interesting conversation. And without you guys forming as a network, it really wouldn't have supported having these conversations in a very public way. So thank you very much, and thank you for everybody listening.
Bye everyone.
No problem at all. Thank you.